Hello everyone. In this video we're going to be covering topics that we didn't cover in the last video. And to start off, I want to introduce you to this map, because today we're not going to be having that much discussion about the movements around the map, and I'm mostly going to be using it as a canvas. But I want to introduce you to this one. It's the map that's being updated by a person named Defman and maybe his team. And here you can see a lot more details, for example, on the troop positioning, some of the later news. And I'm going to leave the link to this map in the description, and this is my present to you as to say sorry that today is not going to be that much map drawings, and mostly it's going to be me discussing the situation. So I want to start with some of the hot news. First things first, we know that in Popasna, the Wagner mercenary headquarters has been struck, apparently. So some of it is still not clear, because there is some news that are reporting that this is just a setup, and actually it's just to drive out the propaganda of Ukraine and then say, haha, you've been all lied to. So that version I've also heard. So, but if it's true, then we know that Popasna Wagner base has been struck. And there's also been talks about the fact that basically the owner of this private military company, which is obviously not a private military, but mercenary company, Prigozhin, was supposed to visit that base at that time. So potentially, if we want to look at the most optimistic scenario, then the Wagner headquarters has been struck by also killing the owner of this mercenary company. That is the news number one. And second news I want to cover is that there has been a lot of discussion in pro-Russian propaganda. Well, HIMARS is just a wonder weapon, and it basically will not win the war for Ukraine. And that is true. HIMARS is not a wonder weapon. It is not a weapon that has some kind of magical abilities to just crush all the enemies. It's quite an old system, actually, when you consider modern army. The thing about HIMARS is because why it's so effective in this war is not because it's so magical, it's because it's a right tool for the right job. Because Russian forces are operating on the dumbest possible tactics ever, so essentially completely leveling the terrain that they want to walk across forward, so they have to have major stockpiles and concentration of forces. That's what makes HIMARS so effective. And then as we are kind of now spreading around, now we see that the next wonder weapon is appearing. It's the anti-radiation missile. Because of the HIMARS strike that are being done on all these forces, Russians are forced to deploy even more radars in the area. And now we're using the quite an old HARM missile that was, I think, developed in the 80s, or used in the 80s even. And this obviously makes that missile super valuable. So the point is that in this war, both the HIMARS or the HARM are not the wonder weapons in itself. It's just that the situation that is dictated makes their capabilities to be completely dominant to whatever Russia has. And I think the fact that we're seeing just how poorly Russia can defend against HIMARS, because not a single system has been destroyed yet, at least with the verified evidence, which is magnificent. And secondly, we've definitely seen them still striking targets even with heavy anti-air controls, such as the video that I showed you yesterday when there was night strikes on the Antonov Bridge. But talking about Russian weak points, let's talk about the Russian plan, right? One of the big kind of questions or topics that we want to talk about is, what does the Russia want? They moved a lot of troops into Kherson. What are they expecting, right? They don't have enough forces to start a major offensive there, because yesterday I mentioned that some of the Russians were actually leaving beyond the Dnipro River. So they were moving back to the south part of the Kherson region. Well, actually now it turns out it's actually the command that is leaving. And I've talked to you about the fact that command in Russia is pretty shit. So their higher ranking officers need to be basically present on the field. Otherwise, the morale of the personnel pretty much drops, and they are, well, firstly, cannot execute properly orders, and secondly, they are pretty much thinking of why should we fight if our leaders are not here with us. And this is terrible. This is terrible news. This only underscores as much that Russians are having no idea what to do with this Kherson area, because going to Kherson and establishing Kherson forepost was essentially a political decision. It's a decision that was made by the politicians because they have political ambitions and because they're being lied to. I actually want to talk about this a little bit more in the upcoming video, because this is a pattern of how the Russians are communicating and how are they reporting. And there has been really nice video. Unfortunately, it was done by, well, I mean, it was done by the Russian-speaking journalists, so there is no direct translation to English. But I will use those journalists' work, and I will refer you to them if you do speak Russian. And they did a very good research about overview of how the situation around the submarine Kursk and sunking of that submarine and the response of the Russian forces, what was to it, and Russian military command, what was it. And it shows really good pattern that I believe is still present, but that will come in a later video, so stay tuned for that. And while you're staying tuned, you can also go under this video and do the YouTube thing so more people can see it and we spread the word. So Russia is really was really expecting that they would get something done on the Kherson area, or at least they will get to the point that they get some kind of a referendum in place, because right now current plan for the Russia, as we can see it, is basically beg for negotiations, because we see them trying one leverage after another, after another, after another. So they're trying to basically do we're gonna nuke the West, we're gonna nuke the Ukraine, their decisions as a essentially the forcing point. Let's talk about this, or otherwise we're gonna nuke Ukraine. Then they did the massive missile strikes all over Ukraine. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago, Ukraine was basically on fire. The missiles flew everywhere, and it didn't stop anyone. So no negotiations. Then it was also the grain export problem. But then the two authoritarian leaders, Turkey and Russia, they did their own stuff. And unfortunately, no, I don't support Turkey. I don't support authoritarian regimes. That's why, for example, I think changing Putin as a provider of the gas source for Europe, exchanging it for the Azerbaijan, who has their own small dictator, is not a really good trade, and we should get out of it. We as democracy should not be dependent on the authoritarian powers providing our resources that are needed for our, well, performance. But that's my personal opinion. And now, obviously, the Enerhotar nuclear station that is here right now, they've been saying out loud, oh, we're completely ready to blow this facility, but they're still not getting the response that they're looking for. So we should expect this pattern to continue, and Russia wants negotiations badly because their troops are exhausted. They don't have the attacking potential anymore. They need time. They need time to regroup. They need time to rebuild. They need time to reorganize. So they basically need Minsk 3. And they are using every possible turn and twist to do that, because they feel that the Ukrainian offensive is coming and they're going to be losing it if they don't find a way out. This obviously is where we turn to the world community, and I'm happy to say that so far the world community, at least we in the West, are holding on. I have big questions on Turkey or Hungary, why these two countries are still within EU or NATO if Russia has already been declared essentially the greatest adversary of the NATO power in the last summit, and now these two countries are looking to establish some kind of relationship between the two. But then again, there is also some other trade is going on, so rest of the NATO is not being very clean about this. In that sense, I very much enjoy the stance of the Baltic nations and Poland that are for the very hard response, because Russia is a terrible state, and at least Putin's Russia is a terrible state, and we should not deal with Russia until Putin is gone and we get some kind of sensible change in the way that they're approaching their leadership. This is also coming to talk about the referendums. I think calling the referendums that they're supposed to do in the Kherson area or Zaporizhia area, which is around here, this is a little bit silly. Calling them referendums is a trigger for us as a Westerners, right? Because we think that referendum is for us is closely associated with the will of the people. Unconsciously, we're still thinking, oh, if there was a referendum, despite us, our brain, we know that, yes, obviously it's a fake. Obviously, they just do everything. What kind of referendum are you talking about if it was done during the active military combat? But there's something deep in us, in our sense of understanding, it still thinks it's like, oh, if there has been a referendum, then there is some kind of air of legitimacy. That's why, for example, a lot of us, and a lot of times I still also hear in the West, that the Crimean referendum still had some legitimacy because there was a referendum. And it doesn't matter just how much rigged it was or how much unjust it was. And the same sense it is here. And I think it is what Putin and his group of murderers really want to exploit. They want us to start having doubts about, are these actually Ukrainian territories, or now they have officially been breakaway regions. Like, for example, the Donbass area, which is just occupied by the Russia. Even I sometimes do mistakes and call it like separatist states, which are obviously not separatists. those are just Russian-hired mercenaries and brainwashed people that they are using as a cannon fodder. There is no legitimacy to calling this a referendum, and it is just a joke, and it is just essentially a talking point for us in the West to start having some kind of negotiation so the most pro-Putin powers can start saying, hey, there has been a referendum, so let's talk with Russia. And in that sense, let's talk about punishing Russia. One of the biggest topics that was discussed recently was the tourist visa ban in Europe, which obviously has garnered a response that, yes, we should in most of the Northern Europe, but obviously Germany thinks otherwise, because of course it does. Dear Olaf Scholz came out with a statement that having a ban on Russians is completely unfeasible. And this is obviously a terrible position to have, because we know that Russians are supporting this. Even the opposition, the Russian opposition, which is super weak, and I know some people are saying, let's support Russian opposition. And I have a lot of things to say about this. But the point is, they represent maybe like 10% of the Russian society. And I'm taking the number out of my head, but I know it's a very negligible part of the Russian society that are actually supporting the Russian opposition leaders. Most of the Russians, even by the opposition own queries or polls, they know that there is a strong majority that supports Putin's regime. Maybe not fully the war, but the Putin's regime is still supporting a lot. There's still people that are saying, well, it's all the military people that are bad, that are doing this war poorly, but our glorious leader, Vladimir Putin, is completely infallible. So while the Russian oppositions is going to say to you, no, this is not true. There is only people. They just need to see some other side. This is what they say all the time. Look at the numbers and try to read between the lines whenever they're having their own polls and discussions prepared basically daily. So all in all, we know that the Russian society supports Putin and generally aggression towards Ukraine, even if they are kind of deluded to the scale of it. Why then it matters to ban the visa travel to Europe? And I think it does make sense. Firstly, visa travel on the tourist visas, I'm sorry, but this is a complete privilege. There's a country that is actively at war against all the European values, and then they come to Europe to visit our European value states. This is just so ridiculous on so many levels. Especially when you see like Russian tourists then harassing Ukrainians when they see Ukrainian march here. Or they walk around saying, it's like, yeah, we're Russians, we're strong. You're so weak. There was a good sentence saying that Russians, the ones that don't support Putin, there is still ability for them to come essentially get some kind of status, like a refugee status or a new status can be introduced, where they can get asylum in the European countries for the state while the Russia is being essentially ruled by the Putin's regime. There is no problem there. So what is the issue then for the Russians to be just having a travel here and go eat at some restaurants? This is not what we're doing. We are at a war with Russia. Like, as much as we want to deny it, maybe it's not a hot active war, but we're at least in some kind of a world understanding. This perspectives of the worlds is a clash. Like, maybe not call it war, let's call it a clash. And in that sense, I think the best one who said it was Veronika Bondarenko. I'm going to show this tweet right here. And she expressed a very good point about that. She really wished that the Russians were at least as outraged about the war as they are outraged about the visa ban. Because while we know and I agree that protesting the war in Russia and inside the regime is really dreadful. You can get beaten, you can get murdered, your whole family can get murdered. We see Russians that are, traveling on visas, but also living inside of Europe where it is safe to protest. They can express whatever opinion they want. But the people inside of those regions are still supporting Russia. They are not protesting. They're protesting the visa ban, but they are not protesting as much the Putin's regime. To look at that, I don't know, try Googling and see the German Russian communities and try to see what their position is. You're going to be completely amazed because they are essentially almost like gathering money to support the Russian offensive inside of Germany. It is crazy how deep the roots of our weakness towards this regime has been in the European Union. That's why I think we need to start severing those connections. We need to start. Not allowing Russians to come to Europe with a tourist visa is a good start. It does not prevent people getting an asylum. It does not people to come here that oppose the regime and want to live in Europe or get an education in Europe. The tourists must go. With this, we need to cover the second part of this. What is the support of support for Ukraine? Because countering Russia, slowing down Russia, but what about supporting Ukraine? And there has been a lot of myths about that the West is not sending enough weapons. And I want to say that thankfully, most of the new data shows that this is slowly but surely going away. As I already expressed before, the facilities and the production facilities are starting to ramp up. There is now official talks for the weapons manufacturer, I think it's between Sweden and Czechia, that are ramping up weapons manufacturing specifically for Ukraine. Before, I reported that there has been just general increase in manufacturing of weaponry inside of our countries, but there was no like dedication. Which purpose does these weapons are going to go for? So maybe it's just a rearmament of already sent to Ukraine stocks. Whereas right now we're having actual talks in the European powers, and I'm expecting in the US as well, of producing weapons specifically for the needs of Ukraine, especially with the Lend-Lease finally kicking into operations around October. This is something we should be very much aware of. And secondly, I already expressed the idea, and I want to underscore it again because this is so accurate. The more win Ukraine does, the more support it will get. We see that the more Russians become desperate, the more stronger the Ukrainian position grows every day, because there was this peak, if you remember, maybe you felt desperate as well. Everything felt that kind of lost, like the Russians were really advancing on the east. That desperation more or less is kind of going away. There's still some lingering progress of the Russians, but there has been no days that I felt or I saw people expressing their opinions that it felt this endless doom to that the Russians are coming and that the Ukraine will fall soon enough. And now it's more about, so when is the Ukraine coming back? It's more hope than this dread that we have in ourselves. And this also translates well to what the world leaders and what the governments of those world powers will do to support Ukraine. The more optimistic and the more dedicated Ukraine will go towards winning this war, the more support will we get. That is just how it was so far in the war, and this is how we should expect it to be going forward. So Ukraine will just get stronger and stronger and stronger. And this is also representing itself in one of the most important things. I mentioned that I would wish that more countries would do training for Ukrainian soldiers as United Kingdom was providing them. So instead of doing their own programs, right now every major country kind of sending their training squad to train Ukrainian soldiers. This means that instead of 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers, maybe now we can get 20, 30,000 every couple of months, full, well-trained Ukrainian soldiers. That is a massive boost, especially with the newly coming ammunition. And talking about the ammunition packages or vehicle packages or just military support, we know that right now we see more and more videos of equipment that has never been disclosed, that we didn't know that it was making its way to Ukraine. So right now there is no actual data on how much and which equipment is actually going to Ukraine. It is all classified, which is great because we never know what Ukrainians are actually having. And from here to there, we see the big columns of Ukrainian military moving somewhere, right? There are videos of that. Maybe I'll link some of it right now. And this is great. This means that the support for Ukraine is growing. The training for Ukrainian personnel is growing. The equipment for that personnel is there. So what we can expect is that soon enough, Ukraine will start getting more trained, more prepared, and more equipped forces coming into the battlefields. And there will be fresh forces. And there will be forces that will allow to do actual pushes towards the Russians in the coming future. We'll obviously see how it will play out. I will still want to, while I've been very much optimistic in this video, I want to still say that the Russia is still strong. And while on the Kherson north side of the river, it does make sense that the Ukrainians will push the Russians out. I think this is pretty much obvious to everyone now. It does seem that it's obvious to Russian generals, which are leaving that part, but to Russian political management, maybe not so much. But the rest of Ukraine, that's going to be a different question, because that's where the Russians will have the option to have fortified positions and actually fight the Ukrainians. And we'll see what's going to go on. And Russia still has a lot of equipment, and they still have an option to mobilize. And while there are predictions saying that the mobilization would just completely ruin the Russian society, we'll see. Maybe it won't. Maybe the Russian society will mobilize and Russia will get 5,000 Iranian drones and 100,000 North Korean troops and some hundreds of thousands tanks from China. I don't know. Anything can happen in this war, so it might be quite a grind. Russia still have a lot of military potential, so we shouldn't discount that. But Ukraine is growing stronger. we definitely see that the tempos for support are increasing. And in the long run, I believe that very decisively Ukraine will win this war and we will have our victory day.